Welcome! Thanks for joining us today at our webinar from the National Pesticide Information Center. NPIC is formed through a cooperative agreement between the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency and Oregon State University. I just have one quick logistical item before we continue. I'd like to invite you all to please use the chat box to ask any questions you have during the webinar. And then after our short presentation, we'll be able to address any of those questions that are in the chat box. And we'll also ask for additional questions at that time. For our presentation today, I'd like to introduce Brittany Hansen, a senior pesticide specialist at NPIC and the project leader for the Herbicide Properties tool.
Thanks, Amy. Good afternoon, and thanks everyone for joining us for our webinar on the Herbicide Properties tool. Before I do get started, I wanted to mention that you can actually mute your audio and video for the duration of the webinar. You can do this by choosing the option up in the upper right-hand corner of your page. And just one quick housekeeping item. This webinar is being recorded and will be made available from the NPIC website and from our YouTube page for future viewing. You can find all of our past webinars and pesticide-related videos on our website, and that's npic.orst.edu/videos. And if you would like to access the Herbicide Properties tool that we'll be going through, you're welcome to do so. You can find that on our website at the link shown here, just below the title of the webinar. And with that, let's go ahead and get started. First, I will start by introducing our organization. I'll talk a little bit about what it is we do here and who we are. And then we'll dig into the Herbicide Properties tool, the whole reason you're here today. I'll touch briefly on some of the background surrounding and leading up to the creation of HPT, as well as the tool's layout, data sources, limitations, and our anticipated use for it. I'll also walk you through a few examples of how we anticipated the app might be used outside of our organization and open things up for a few questions at the end. So who is NPIC? We are funded through a cooperative agreement with the US EPA and Oregon State University. And for the last 20 years, NPIC has been housed at OSU. It's our role here to provide science-based information about pesticides in order to promote informed decision-making. So specialists here, we are highly educated, highly trained. Most of us have master's degrees, and we come from diverse science backgrounds, including chemistry, microbiology, soil science, mammal biology, environmental toxicology, and even food science. So the basis of our job is to communicate science information in a way that helps translate technical jargon into everyday language. And we do this over the phone and then in the resources that we create, things like our fact sheets, our videos, web content, and then resources like the HPT. Just a little bit about what we don't do here. We don't do product testing, and we're not an advocacy organization, so we can't make recommendations for products or even recommend whether or not someone should use a pesticide. We're aware that labels and laws can vary state by state, and even though we have access to federal labels, we don't provide instructions on how to use products or provide any legal advice. But we do make sure to provide people with contact information for appropriate resources when they have questions like these, though. And a little bit of background on where we were coming from when we chose to create this. So in the mid-90s, the OSU Extension Pesticide Properties Database was compiled by experts, and it has been and really still is available from the NPIC website. The database was designed with a technical audience in mind, and it's available in a table-only format. There are a few key environmental fate properties listed there: soil half-life, water solubility, sorption coefficient, and pesticide movement rating. And that would be rated from low to very high for each pesticide. And so that includes herbicides, insecticides, fungicides, and so on. There are, of course, other resources that exist, but those are also for technical audiences. And as with all NPIC resources that are created, we wanted a database that could be used by both professionals and non-professionals. And we wanted it to be available to people where they needed it. So whether that meant from home or work or in the field on a job, we felt that there was a need for an approachable yet well-cited database. And we were up for the challenge of creating one, starting with herbicides. The goal that we had in mind for this was really to create a unique resource with visual appeal that would be easy to access and understand. So what is the HPT? We designed it for people trying to compare properties of 2 or more herbicides to better assess the potential for groundwater contamination or the probability for movement of an herbicide into groundwater after an application. And the app is web-based. And what that means is that there aren't any updates or app downloads needed. And it means that when we add new data or make changes to the database, those changes are automatically reflected in the web app. And that means that you can use the app from your computer or from a mobile device, and that makes it easy to consult while you're in the field or wherever you have internet access. We wanted to create a tool that listed the resources used so that people could quickly and easily find exactly where we pulled that data from. So we actually we dropped waypoints in as many of the resources as we possibly could, and we linked directly to those from the app. For resources that we couldn't directly link to, we provided citations in pop-out windows like this. So you see where the citation number is. This would be an example of something like a hard copy volume that we linked, that we referred to. We wanted to make sure that people could investigate technical terms and concepts directly from the app rather than having to go somewhere else right off the bat. And so we provided links or pop-out explanations to address this. For example, if you needed more information about what the term vapor pressure meant, you could actually open our fact sheet. There we go. So we created the app with the hope that professionals might be able to use it to help them assess an herbicide's potential to contaminate groundwater or move away from a site. And we hoped it might be useful to people like DEQ, extension agents, maybe environmental agencies, pest control operators, and those involved in crop agriculture herbicide use. We also hoped that the public might find the app useful as they dig into similar questions, looking for similar information. Maybe they're selecting an herbicide to use on home lawns or urban or rural areas. That might include people like homeowners or landscapers, things like that. Really, our goal was to create this for anyone trying to compare 2 or more herbicides in order to choose the option that would pose the least risk to groundwater. And as a table here, this is showing the different resources that we were using when we were looking for this data. So we would start out by searching primary resources. So that might be things like EPA federal regulation publications like the RED or EFED risk assessments. If we couldn't find it in those resources, then we might move on to our internal database where we house different types of resources, things like published peer-reviewed studies, ecological risk assessments, and then archive documents, things that may not necessarily be accessible any longer, things like EPA dockets. If we couldn't find it in either one of those 2 types of resources, then we would consult the SciFinder database, and we were looking for published peer-reviewed studies in those cases. If a data point could not be found in any of these primary resources, we would then turn to a secondary resource, and that would be the Herbicide Handbook, or Herbie, as we like to call it. And we would look here for those values that we just couldn't quite find in the primary literature. And so it turns out that actually 11% of the values that we have in our database were found in Herbie. And what that means is that for the most part, values were typically found in the primary literature rather than in those secondary sources or in that secondary source. And as professionals, you know that the data points like pesticide half-lives are best reported as ranges. But for the use in our database and for calculation of an active ingredient's movement potential, data was actually reported as a single value. And this is oftentimes what we found in literature. when we did find ranges, what we reported was the median value. So one of the values in our database is the groundwater ubiquity score, or GUS. And the GUS is an empirically derived value that relates persistence, or half-life, and soil sorption, reported as KOC. And this is often used to rank a pesticide's potential to move toward groundwater. This type of value is really giving an indication of whether a chemical will be likely to leave the top 5 feet of soil, so that buffer region, whether it will be likely to move beyond that zone through a soil profile. And we aren't the first to use this value. The GUS calculation has been validated in peer-reviewed studies and has been used as one component in other pesticide properties databases, such as NRCS's WinPST. And so what we did is we ranked the potential, we ranked that from extremely low to high, and that's for herbicides to move toward groundwater based on the ranges of GUS values listed right here. And we did this following the method used by NRCS in the WinPST program. We performed GUS calculation by active ingredient in different soil types. To do this, we required half-life and KOC values be found for each soil type, and that's with the primary drivers being clay, silt, and sand. So for example, say that we found a half-life value for atrazine in sandy soil. In order to calculate a GUS value for atrazine in this type of soil, we also needed to find a KOC value for that same soil type. And if we found both half-life and KOC for an herbicide, but the soil type was unlisted or unknown, we would still go ahead and calculate a GUS value for the ingredient, but the soil type would be reported as unknown. So with all of this in mind, I do want to take a look at the app in action. But before that, let's take a quick second to talk about some of the limitations of HPT. So earlier I mentioned some of the limitations of npic services and that we cannot provide recommendations. Consequently, neither can the app. The HPT only allows you to search for information about one active ingredient at a time. So to compare properties of ingredients, one workaround is to open additional tabs or windows in your browser, and then you have those listed there. But also related to this limitation, if you wanted to search for information about a formulated product that maybe, say, has multiple active ingredients, you can't directly identify those ingredients from HPT, but you can use another web app tool that we've created called the npic Product Research Online, or NPRO, to find out more about the ingredients included in a specific product. And then once you know which active ingredients are listed for that product, you can use HPT to dig into the environmental fate questions that you might have. Another limitation with HPT happens when you try to open the linked resources, the ones that we've dropped waypoints into that highlight exactly where we pulled the information from. So it turns out that some PDF readers will only open the document, which means that you have to search for the information yourself, maybe using a keyboard shortcut like Control F. Other PDF readers might save the highlights, but they don't automatically jump to the page. So you might have to actually scroll to find the highlights, but this is solely dependent on the type of PDF reader that you have on your device. Okay, and the last limitation here is the fact that we are still in an active QA process, and we're continuously looking for any issues that might pop out, and we're making corrections and updates as we find those issues and as needed. So with that, let's go ahead and look at some of the scenarios that I have set up for you on how you might expect to use HPT, or how we might expect people to use HPT. As a side note, I should mention with the previous slide with the limitations that as you use the app, we definitely welcome any thoughts and comments that you might have as far as how to make the app or the tool more useful to you. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. So in this first scenario, you are trying to decide between two products, one with diclofenac and the other with glyphosate as the active ingredient, and this is for use in your yard. Your property has a shallow well, so we might expect the water table to be high here. You would, of course, want to think about features of the area that might increase or decrease the risk of potential for groundwater contamination. For example, grade or slope of the yard in relation to the well, maybe soil type, when the next rain event might be expected, things like that. If you don't know the soil type, or maybe which way your groundwater flows, you might at that point consider consulting an expert, say maybe your soil and water conservation district, to learn more about that. So how might we use HPT? Let's say that at this point you haven't looked into which soil type you have, but you know that you'll have to treat a potentially sensitive area. You've at this point read the environmental fate section of the label and the rest of it for both products, and you'll apply either one appropriately. Perfect. So how can you use HPT to find out more about the risk to your well? Let's start by looking at what the app has on diclofenac. Okay, so we go over here and we will enter it in. There it is. Okay, and we see water solubility, 21. Let's find out more about what that means. What does that term mean? Okay, and so we come up with the our web page on water solubility. We have explanation, we have ranges. Okay, and come back here, we see vapor pressure, moderately volatile with that description. Find out more about it here. Okay, and this is one of our fact sheets. Okay, and then looking down at groundwater ubiquity score, we have a brief description here, but we also have a web page, and this does have ranges listed as well. You can dig in a little bit more on these terms. Okay, and then we have, let's see here, we have soil half-life. See what it has to say here. Okay, this is another one of our fact sheets. Perfect. Absorption coefficient has a pop-out with an explanation so that you can find out more about that term, what it means. Okay, you see those numbers there. So let's move on to the second one that we had that we're trying to decide between. Glyphosate, and there it is. Okay, water solubility, 12,000. Vapor pressure, groundwater ubiquity score, very, very low. We have different soil types listed for this one. We have sandy versus silty loam, and an explanation of what that means. We see half-life for both of those types of soil, in both of those types of soil, and a KOC, as well as hydrolysis half-life. Okay. And so just to recap some of the information that we looked at, I didn't go into detail on the numbers there, but here we can compare them, much like you might if you're writing this down as an individual looking through the app. So diclofenac has moderate solubility in water, moderate potential to volatilize, high potential to leach or move toward groundwater in an unspecified soil type. That was based on that GUS value, and has a KOC of 400 compared to glyphosate, which is quite soluble in water, but keep in mind that glyphosate is a Switter ion, and that's a unique property. That property does drive a lot of its activity in soil. So this one has very low volatilization potential, and it has very low potential to leach or move toward groundwater. That was again based on that GUS value. And this one has a KOC of 33,000 to 40,000, and that does depend on the soil type. So we can kind of compare and contrast these here, and information like this might help you to more easily choose the product that fits your needs and has the lowest potential to move toward groundwater. Okay, and so in this second scenario here, our landscaping company has been asked to help control unwanted plants in a green space, and we're thinking about using an herbicide that has 3 different active ingredients. It has 2,4-D, dicamba, and mecoprop. In this case, we know that the soil is primarily sandy loam, and so we're a little concerned about what the potential for chemical movement might be into shallow groundwater. So in this scenario, we want to do a little bit more research on all 3 of those active ingredients in the product before moving forward with any sort of treatment. So let's take a look at 2,4-D first. Okay, we'll go over here, 2,4-D. It looks like 2,4-D has moderate water solubility, GUS value with a low movement rating at 0.99. Interesting. Let's see why that might be. It looks like the soil half-life in sandy soil, which includes sandy loam, is short, around 3 days. Looking at where that information came from, we see that here. Okay. And looks like KOC in this type of soil is 73. Let's take a look at that resource too. Okay, there it is. Okay, so next, let's go ahead and take a look at dicamba. Okay, water solubility here is high. Looks like the data needed for the GUS calculation was limited to silty loam soil, but it would be expected to have moderate potential in that. Also in silty loam, half-life around 6 days. Not our soil type, but it still gives us an idea of the potential for half-life. Here's KOC value in sandy soil, 17.5. And let's quickly take a look at mycoprop. Water solubility is moderate. GUS may have high potential to move towards shallow groundwater in sandy soils and sensitive areas. And half-life in sandy soils is short, about 13 days, KOC of 20. So it looks like the 2,4-D would have low potential to move toward and contaminate shallow groundwater, but the dicamba and mycoprop might be quite a bit more likely to move. So that might help us make a decision about whether this product would be appropriate for use at our job site. Okay, so in this third scenario, it's part of a Tier 1 assessment. We're looking at whether or not a product with atrazine might be appropriate for use in the park. So the areas that we're looking at controlling invasive plants in have diverse soil types. They range from sandy, rocky, to heavy clay content. So because maybe we have a more technical background here, all we're really looking for are the phys-chem properties for this herbicide. So instead of pulling up HPT in the list view, you open it up in the full table view. Too many columns to look through, we can limit the ones that are visible. Let's start by getting rid of vapor pressure and hydrolysis half-life. Okay, searching for atrazine. Let's see, we see the water solubility is 33, moderate. There's only data available for atrazine in an unknown soil type. Half-life 106 days, KOC 100, GUS 4.06. And it looks like atrazine has high potential to move toward groundwater in sensitive areas, so those that might have a high water table, for example. Okay, and with that, we'll go ahead and open it up for any questions that you might have. Thanks for joining us. We really appreciate any feedback that you're willing to give as far as using HPT in your line of work. Any suggestions or thoughts that you might have, you're welcome to send those our way to the email address listed here, and we will go ahead and post the recorded webinar to the link listed below. Thanks again for joining us.
Okay, great. Thanks, Brittany. So now we're going to accept questions. If you guys have any questions for Brittany on HPT or anything specifically, please type them into the chat box, and you can make that available for everyone to see. That might be easier for everyone. Right now, it looks like we don't have any questions yet, so we're going to wait just a second so you can formulate those. Okay, yeah, so it looks like we just got a question. Will this be extended to include other pesticides, such as fungicides, insecticides, etc.?
Good question. So that would be wonderful. We would love that, but unfortunately, it's not within, not really within the scope of what we're able to do right now. Mostly limited by things like, time, energy, funding. So probably not at this time.
We wrote it into our current grant cycle just to do the herbicides, and so I guess potentially in our next application we could expand that if it seems reasonable, but yep, currently not now. Okay. Let's see if there's another one. Oh yeah, so does the HPT include various forms of herbicides? They give the example of 2,4-D, which has amines, choline, and esters, because they can have various volatilities.
So yes, it does have those listed, and I showed a pretty short example where you could kind of see down below, but if you're searching for an active ingredient like 2,4-D, once you do that search, it'll pull up all the related ones, and you can go to those, and that is limited to the data that may have been available in literature.
Yeah. Okay, if you guys have any other questions, you can type those in. Okay, is it possible to add weather data into the HPT, or was that included somehow? I'm happy to answer this. We don't have any way to put weather in there. So when users are using this, there's no way to include if there's a rainstorm coming, if it's really hot or windy out. So those are things people just have to take into consideration on their own, along with things like landscape, slope, whether there is ground cover on your soil. All of those things are obviously going to affect how things move into the soil and how deep they might be transported. So we don't have those included. That would be amazing, but it's not possible at this point. So let's see if we have any other questions coming in. We'll give you guys another moment or so to enter those. Okay, it looks like people are starting to take off, so before you go, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate having you all here. Do you have anything else you want to say?
Nope, thank you.
Okay, well, thank you, and this will be up, like Brittany said, later online to watch again. So thanks for joining, and have a good day.